right, it's day 6 of the River City Yarns Advent box, and I'm opening up to reveal a project kit, the Epic Ornament Ball. Inside here I've got a pattern and Epic yarns. My kit has a green and a white. Let's see what this is all about. All right, so I've got all my tools assembled. I've got some lucky stitch markers and my yarn and my needle, and the pattern says to start by casting on 6 stitches. I find for a project like this, when you've only got a few stitches, that the easiest way to cast on and get knitting in the round is not to divide your stitches over 3 needles right away. So here's a little trick. I'm going to cast on 6 stitches and I'm going to divide it over 2 needles. So I'm going to put 3 stitches on each needle and just fold it in half like this. And then I'm going to just start knitting. The yarn that's attached to the ball is on my back needle and the rest of the stitches are on my front needle. Okay, so it says as soon as you can, place a locking stitch marker to indicate the beginning of the round. So with my stitch markers here, I've got one that's a slightly different color. So I'm just going to put it on after the first stitch. Here's how I work this. So the pattern instructions say knit 1. There we go. I'm going to slide that different colored marker onto my needle. And then the next instruction is to knit into the front and back. So I'm going to do that. That's knit into the front stitch. And then right away knit into the back leg of the same stitch. And then knit 1. And I need to do that twice. So I'm just going to turn my stitches around like this and keep working. It's a little crowded to do this on just 2 needles, but it is quite doable, and I find it easier than working on 3 needles or 4 needles. So just bear with me here. The next round, we're just going to knit. So again, I'm just going to turn my needles around and knit. After I make this first stitch and I pass the stitch marker over, I give it a nice good tug back here. Knit the second stitch. Again, give it a good tug. That prevents any kind of gap from appearing between my needle tips. Okay, one more round. And on the next round, we increase quite a bit. And so in this round, I am going to get going on 3 or 4 needles. Given that I have to have 16 stitches when I'm done this, I think moving to 4 needles with the 5th one to knit with is probably a good idea. So that's what I'm going to do. Pick up an empty needle and keep knitting. Get that tail out of the way. Take my empty needle and keep going. And then pick up my 4th needle here and knit the last needle. Okay, turn it around. There's the bottom of my ornament ball. My marker is on my first needle, so I know what's going on. All right, so I've knit all the way around and I put my stitch markers in. The pattern says now to knit up to 1 stitch before the marker and then knit into the front and back. So that's what I'm going to do here. Knit 1, there's the stitch before the marker, so I'll increase in this stitch. And then because I was working on double pointed needles, I couldn't put a marker here at the edge, so my marker is actually the division between the needles. So I'm going to knit into the front and back of this stitch, because if I was working on a circular or doing magic loop or something, then that would have had a marker on it. So I am knitting up to 1 stitch before the marker and then increasing in that stitch before the marker, passing the marker over to my other needle, and then knitting, in my case, until I have 1 stitch left on the double pointed needle, and then increasing as well. So I kind of have an imaginary marker that's sitting in between these 2 double pointed needles. All right, I've worked my rows rounds 5 and 6, so I have 40 stitches in total now. And I've taken out my marker, done the extra round 6, and taken out my marker and replaced it with a locking stitch marker. That way I know which needle is my first needle, but it doesn't get in the way of the next part. So the next part is about weaving the contrasting color yarn, which I've woven up into a ball, to create a decoration on the outside of your Christmas ornament. So I'm going to start by taking the contrasting color yarn, and I'm going to hold the tail on the inside and just leave it there for now and follow the chart. So the chart says if it's a green square, then you just knit the main color, and if it's a white square, you weave the yarn outside, on the outside. So I've got the tail tucked in on the inside. I'm just going to take the yarn and put it in between my needles like that, so it's on the outside of the ball. I'm going to knit the next stitch, because you knit all the stitches with your main color, and I'm going to put the white yarn back to the inside of the ball. So my white yarn is just covering up that stitch with 1 strand on the outside. And then stitch 3 is green, and stitch 4 is green, and stitch 5 is white. So I'm going to bring the yarn to the outside of my ball, knit the next stitch, because it's just 1, and then pop it back to the wrong side of the ball, or the inside of the ball. That was 5, so here's stitch 6, stitch 7, and then 8 and 9 are both white. So I bring the yarn to the outside of the ball, knit 8 and 9, and then flip the yarn back to the inside and knit stitch 10. Now, to make sure that my weaving isn't too tight, I don't want to pull too hard on it, I'm just going to give these stitches a pull in this direction so that I can see that white yarn on the outside. Once I stuff it, it's going to be quite stretched, so I don't want to pull too tightly on that. All right, I'm carrying on the chart. I've done stitches 1 through 10, and now I'm working on 11. So 11 has the yarn in the front, so I'm going to do 11 and 12, flip the yarn to the back, 13, 14, flip the yarn to the front for 15, to the back again because it's just 1 stitch, 16, 17, 18, 19, again to the back, and 20. Give it a little pull here just to make sure that nothing's too tight or puckered, and turn my work. Okay, so the chart is from stitches 1 to 20. So when you get to 20, you start over again. So I'm back on row 1, stitch 1, and I'm starting that same sequence over again. Now I have found that if you can hold the yarn in your left hand a little bit, you can make it come forward and back a little bit easier than doing it one at a time. But you know what? There are only 7 rounds to this design, so if you were flipping it back and forth manually, that's not really a big deal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The yarn comes to the front. 9. Take the yarn to the back. There's 10. Give it a little stretch. Sort myself out here. Turn. And now I'm doing 11 with the yarn in the front. Remember to take it to the back. Oh, sorry, nope. 11 and 12. Take it to the back. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 is in the front, so is 19. Take it to the back for 20. Give it a little tug. Okay, that's round 1. I'm back to where my starting marker is, so I'm going to do round 2. And in round 2, I start with white yarn in the front. So in round 2, we do it exactly the same way, working from the right to the left, tucking the white yarn in the back for the green stitches and bringing it to the front for the white stitches. Remember to take it to the back for the next one, if that's what's indicated in the chart. Okay, I'm going to carry on knitting my chart yarn, knitting according to the chart, flipping the yarn back and forth to create the design on the outside. I'm going to zip ahead here and I'll come back and see you in a little bit. All right, so I've done the weaving section and I've decreased for the top, and I just want to talk to you a little bit about stuffing the ornament ball. So when you get to this round, the instructions are to stuff firmly. So I've got some polyfill here that I'm going to pop inside my ball. If you don't have access to polyfill, there are lots of things you can stuff your ornament ball with. You can use yarn bits, so if you have some yarn kicking around that you want to use up, some acrylic that you aren't using anymore, or just some ends of yarn, they make good stuffing. Wool makes good stuffing. I've even used a plastic bag in a pinch. But here's my tip for you. When you're stuffing, make sure to get into the sides of the ball and fill it out, because if you just stuff straight down, then your ball won't look nice and round. So I'm sticking my finger in under the sides of the ball as I work around to get it nice and evenly stuffed. Now, overstuffing is key because this will compact into the ball and make it look less round than we want it to be. So, so make sure that you get quite a bit of stuffing in there. You don't want to see it through the sides of your ball. So if you've got a hole in there or something that is showing the fiber fill or the stuffing through it, then maybe take a little bit out. But I'm going to get it as full as I can. And then I'm just going to keep pushing it down in there so that I can finish the last 2 rounds. So that looks nice and firm, and I can still squish it, but it is filling out all the sides of the ball and threatening to come out the top. So just push it down and carry on. On the last round, you're going to knit 2 together all the way around, and here's where I again find it easier to go back to working on 2 needles. So if you're working on double pointed needles, this is how I do it. I'm just knitting 2 together to one needle, and slide that third stitch over here. Of course, you don't have to do it this way, it's just this is how I do it. So sometimes I find that's helpful to see. Okay, so I'm down to 6 stitches. I'm going to grab my scissors here and cut my yarn. Thread my wool needle. And I put the stitches onto the wool needle in the direction I would have knit them. So there's the tail coming out of my yarn. I'm just going to slide these 3 stitches onto my wool needle. Carry on and slide these 3 stitches onto my wool needle and pull tight. Sometimes I find that it leaves a little gap here. So my last trick is to pull the tail through the loops at the top of your ball just one more time, and that fills in any spaces you might have. I also do this at the top of hats. Okay, so if I take out my little marker here and I give the whole thing a little roll in my hands, you can see that my ornament ball is done. You can use this tail as a hanger for it, or use the tail to tie on or sew on a little ribbon so that you can hang your ornament from your tree. Well, thanks everybody for knitting a Christmas ornament ball with me. Well, I guess I should mention too, if you have any places where you feel like the yarn is a little loopy, you can pull on the next, where it's woven in, you can just pull on it and kind of even out the tension between the different strands here. So you might find where you've had to strand behind more stitches that you need to just give a little bit of a pull. All right, Merry Christmas.